Howdy folks, your Princess Katakayana here, and today we are going to be taking a look at why sometimes you have to review a game based on what it is rather than damning it on what it's not. Little bit meta, I know, but stick with me. Let's take a look at Werewolf the Apocalypse: Earthblood. So I come to this from a very specific angle, and I think you guys should know about it. I am a huge fan of the Werewolf the Apocalypse tabletop role-playing game. It's been a while since I played it, admittedly. It was made by the people who made Vampire the Masquerade, White Wolf. If you aren't a tabletop role-player, you'll know Vampire the Masquerade from Bloodlines and... well, actually I was going to say you'll know it from Bloodlines 2, but the timetable for that one has gone the same way that CM Punk's MMA debut did, yeah? Hopefully it'll be a better quality. But look, I've got props and everything. I even have my original Werewolf the Apocalypse sourcebook, so it's fair to say that I'm a fan, right? All of that said, one thing to make absolutely clear at the start of this review: the game is not an RPG. Basically at all. It does have like a couple of odd leveling mechanics and the occasional dialogue choice. But that is all honestly window dressing for the game's actual focus, which is, You're gonna have to stick with me on this one for a second, alright? See, werewolves in this universe actually have three forms rather than two. They can be human, an ordinary wolf, and that sort of David Norton-esque Wolfman form that you're probably familiar with from a lot of movies. These forms all have their own unique names, which you're not going to use unless you're into the tabletop role-playing game and know them anyway, so I will stick to the ones I just set out. There is actually a lot of that going on, what with the game being based off an RPG and all, but again, it's mostly window dressing. There are various names for various things. In terms of a lot of that RPG stuff, the opening cutscene does a great job of concisely setting up werewolves are environmentalists with Native American style spirit guides. They fight Lovecraftian horrors trying to destroy the world and create entropy. It's got a great soundtrack too, have a quick listen. See, isn't that very Witcher 3? Don't get used to it though, because they spent the entire budget on the trailer soundtrack. One of those things is definitely not like the other. Anyway, back to my point. So you have these three forms. You have human, which is basically doing dialogue, using computers, that kind of thing. You have the wolf, that's for stealth, for sneaking through air vents, for making quick dashes from cover to cover. And you have the wolfman, which is the form you actually want to play as. Alright, I'm being a little bit flippant here, but I'm kind of impressed and a little bit disbelieving, honestly. Of all the developers that actually fixed stealth gameplay and made it fun, Cyanide? Like, don't get me wrong, I loved Styx, okay? That was a great little stealth game, but these are the guys that made Pro Cycling Manager 2017. I didn't expect them to be the ones taking the next step in stealth. I need to explain myself. Here's how it works, okay? You get out of the tutorial mission. That contains a bunch of instant fail stealth and gives you entirely the wrong impression, so basically ignore it. You start playing the game properly, and you are given the impression that we are doing stealth action Metal Gear style, and it's certainly suggested for most missions that you at least start with a stealthy approach. So that is a thing you do, right up until you get seen, and then in a move which I'm fairly sure wasn't in Solid Snake's repertoire, and for God's sake no one make that suggestion to Konami, you turn into the 12-foot tall, 700-pound wolfman you always knew you could be, and you just rip everything to shreds like you're playing a game about being a badass werewolf. There's no penalty for being seen, no nothing. Hell, you can do this during dialogue if you decide someone's asking for it. Now, I will say, and we'll talk more about the negatives in a few minutes, Wolfman combat is extremely simplistic, and I would love to see a potential sequel fix that, but it's immensely satisfying to just cut loose, especially if you have been given the stealth gameplay a try. Now, I have an educational background in game development, and I can tell you that what they do here should not work on the face of it, but it absolutely does. I always found myself giving the stealth a go. I actually like stealth games, but I'm not that good at them. Something always ends up going the route of Inspector Clouseau, if you know what I mean. But here, I didn't get a loading screen. What I got was the opportunity to give whatever facility I was in a fairly large repair bill and a huge retraining cost for new soldiers, because the entrails of the previous ones were doing a Jackson Pollock all over the wall. And I'm aware that's a reference to a 1968 British comedy film and an artist that's been dead since 1951 in a single segment. If I had a demographic, I'm not entirely sure I'd be targeting them right now, but still. So I mentioned there were downsides to all this. The game is a little bit, and this is harsh because it's a budget title, but it all feels a little bit PS2. The NPCs aren't well animated. There's a lot of dead-eyed staring going on during cutscenes. The story's forgettable, it's honestly not well acted either, and everything has that feeling of jank in its movement and its operation that budget titles just seem to these days, unfortunately, combat included. Now, I was a PS2 fan, so this is kind of no issue for me because I enjoy the gameplay loop so much. If you came into gaming after that era though, it's something to be aware of, because Werewolf is dated in a lot of ways. Something unfortunate as well, the environments and enemies look like someone left the cloning machine on for the first 2/3 of the game, and much as I do like the design on the friendly spirits, there's kind of only one or two of them. As you do get on, you do get these Lovecraftian horror things to fight, and they add a good deal of variety, and they look great to boot. I'd just prefer not to have waited till the last third of the game to get them. Leaving aside the jank because we already discussed that, the only real downside I have to the game is the difficulty. Your princess is normally a thoroughly medium princess when it comes to difficulty, and any jokes about me clearly being a large princess, don't bother, I've heard them all. I know this seems to fly in the face of being a badass werewolf like I was talking about earlier, but it would be nice if occasionally I had to think about which button I was pressing or something during most of the combat. If you up the game to hard, this does get a lot better. More of the enemies are given silver weapons which stop you regenerating health, but they only get them for the specific fight you're in, so you still have to kind of be careless for it to be a problem. And whilst I will say I am fine with the game being action focused and using Werewolf's World as more of a backdrop, there's one glaring omission of sorts, and this is a personal criticism rather than necessarily one with the game. The Black Spiral Dancers, the evil faction of werewolves, get used like 3 times in the entire story. Now, admittedly, when I used to run werewolf games, I overused the hell out of these guys. But that said, I'd have loved to have some more wolf-on-wolf fights, or just have them have more to do with the story. As I mentioned for a couple of things now, it's something a sequel could very much fix, and I hope we get one because the developers are clearly in love with the world. They could easily make this a more involved story and just a little bit longer. I will say though, at 8 hours, the game just manages to escape being repetitive, so they'd need to have something more in their quiver if they were going to do that. How much you get out of Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood, and my that title is such a mouthful, is really going to depend on how you feel going into it. If you're going in looking for this really in-depth RPG based on the werewolf world and expanding certain parts of it, you're not going to get that here. If you are looking for a really deep action game like God of War Werewolf Edition, you're not going to find that here either. If you are looking for a budget title that's essentially an arena combat game where you get to play as a badass werewolf and has kind of a bit of a story thrown in the background, this is exactly what you're going to get here. This is going to be one of those games I go to let off steam for months and months and months from now. I do recommend it on that basis, just know what you're getting into when you start. Anyway folks, thank you for watching. Next week I am going to cross something off my bucket list. I'm going to get to review a Mario platformer. I have really waited so long for this and I am so excited about it. I hope you are too. Thank you for watching. I will see you all next week. I have been Princess Carta Guyana. You are all beautiful. Peace. I'm out.